Hello, the Internet Tough Monkey here once again. Hope you're all well. Thanks for stopping by. Okay, today I'm looking at this, the new Sega Saturn Pro wireless controller by Retrobit. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time since they first teased it on their socials last year. And it's been out in American markets and other areas for quite some time now, but it's only just arrived on the 30th of January 2024 in the UK. And today, the 31st of January, my pre-order from Amazon has arrived, and I'll open this up in a bit and have a bit of a tinker with it, and I'll give you my thoughts on it. But the reason I've been looking forward to it is because I'm a big Sega nut, and I've still got my original Sega Saturn, which I play regularly. I've got very nearly 100 games, a few of them are there, but I'm also a retro gamer in general. I play a lot of retro games on my PC here, and as you can see, I've got plenty of controllers up there to go at. That there is the original Model 1 Fat Sega Saturn console controller, and unpopular opinion, I prefer it to all other controllers that Sega made. It just fits my hand better. I know the thumb controller, the D-pad, was a little bit vicious, but it just fitted my hand quite nicely. And the shoulder triggers were absolutely awful, but I like that controller. And I killed Sega Rally back in 1997 or whatever it was. I spent months playing nothing but this game with that controller, and I adore it. And the evolution of it, which is up there and here, this is the one I use every day, is the Model 2 Sega Saturn controller. And I don't particularly like it. It's a bit too small for my hands, and I've not got big hands. It just feels a bit dinky, and extended gaming sessions, it just feels a bit awkward and begins to get painful over time. And that is what this is based on. The Model 2 joypad is what this new Pro controller, wireless controller, is based on. So I'm going to be interested to see how it works, whether it's any bigger in my hands, any more comfortable to use. It is a little bit larger because it's got the addition of these Hall Effect 3D thumbsticks, and that's where this next bit of the review comes in, because that there is the original 3D Pro controller that Sega brought out. It was actually in response to Nintendo announcing their analog stick, and they managed to rush it out, and it reached the market before the N64 controller did. So that controller up there, the 3D Sega controller for Saturn, was the first to market controller which had analog stick, or the 3D controller as they called it, and the shoulder buttons, the analog shoulder buttons. But it was only compatible with a handful of games. For example, Sega Rally is not supposed to be compatible with the original version of it, which it would have been really good, because analog control is far better on driving games. I know a lot of people are going to be using it for nights and Christmas nights and other games like that, but for driving games, 3D analog sticks are really, really useful. But it was compatible with games like Daytona USA Championship Edition and Manx TT, and it works a treat on that. You can just get say on Manx TT, the leaner the bar, you can just get it so on a 3D controller, but on a digital stick, it just doesn't quite feel right. You just tap, 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 and the bike's going like that all the time. Whereas with an analog stick, you can just lean it how you want to. So analog sticks work, but it was a pig of a controller. It's just a big, bulky thing. It was clearly rushed out, and the actual ergonomics of it weren't particularly good. So I'm interested to see how this works as a 3D pad. Now, the 3D sticks, they are Hall Effect sticks. If you're unfamiliar with what Hall Effect is, unlike most of the pads up there, including the current generation of console controllers, they use a electrical resistance to create the movement. So when you press down on the D-pad or the analog stick, it makes an electrical contact, and over time that wears down, and that's when you get this stick drift. Those Switch controllers, they've got stick drift, and they're only a few months old when they start getting stick drift, but that doesn't happen with Hall Effect. Hall Effect controllers, they use a magnetic resistance. There's no physical contact, so it's a lot more precise, and it doesn't wear down, but very few controllers actually have that because it can be expensive to do. I've got a N64 upgrade kit, which I got from 8BitDo, which upgrades the standard analog stick to a Hall Effect stick, and it's so much better. It really, really is good. Retrobit and 8BitDo especially, they do a lot of these Hall Effect type controllers, and this is the latest line of them from Retrobit. So we're going to open this up now, and we're going to have a bit of a play with it. Okay, let's get this thing unboxed. Now, I've chosen the white version of this controller. There are two versions, the white version, which is the Japanese spec version, and then there's a black one, which is the European and North American version. I did debate over to which one to go for, because my other controllers are black, but my 3D controller is the white Japanese version, so I thought I'd go with the white Japanese version of this Wireless Pro controller. And as it turns out, at the time of recording this video, Amazon only currently sell the white version, so they kind of made up my mind for me. The controller feels remarkably similar to the Model 2 Sega Saturn controller. That's the receiver to plug into your Sega Saturn, and this is the receiver for plugging into your Windows PC or Switch or PlayStation 3. And you also get a USB-A to USB-C power cable. That's to charge up the battery. There it is in comparison to the Model 2 controller. Very similar. The only real differences there are the shoulder buttons, and that's in comparison to the original 3D controller from Sega Saturn. The major thing I noticed was that the shoulder buttons aren't analog like they were on the 3D pad. Okay, before I test out the new Sega Saturn Wireless Pro joypad, I want to demonstrate to you what I'm expecting from this controller. This is my original 3D pad for the Sega Saturn, and this is the original Model 2 digital pad for the Sega Saturn. I'm going to test it out by the medium of Manx TT Superbike, and if I switch to my camera over my shoulder, hello there. This is my Sega Saturn, and this is Manx TT, original game there, which is I must have had for getting on to 25 years, something silly like that. And I'm going to boot up my Sega Saturn, which is connected to my LG OLED TV by a Keiko HDMI adapter, which I've tested not so long ago. It's not too bad. It's not the last word in quality, but for the money, it really isn't too bad. So while this boots up, this is Isle of Man Manx TT, which I mentioned in the intro, which is 3D joypad compatible. There weren't many games that were actually fully compatible with the 3D pad, and you enabled it by... It takes me back to the arcade days. You enabled the analog, the 3D pad, by switching it from digital there to analog there. So let's get into this. Take us to the options, make sure it's all working properly. Like I say, there's only a few games that was compatible with this, and they really do work well on driving games, especially this game, which is why I want to demonstrate it to. So, two-player controller. Let's just make sure this is all working. So we've got the 3D pad connected there, and the digital pad over there. So we've got brake and accelerator. First time we've got analog controllers there. Gear up and gear down, and then left and right on the 3D stick there. So we'll come out of that, and I'll just play a quick arcade game and just demonstrate to you what this should achieve both on 3D and in digital pad format. You'll see that the analog pad, you've got a bit more scope for control. It's not as developed as, say, the latest generations of DualSense and Xbox controllers, but it does give you better precision. There's only a bit of travel on there, there's not a huge amount of travel, but you can set the bike up and hold it on a lean. So go to a different camera setting. I got full gear sticks on, didn't I? So let's just cycle through that. But if you see, I can just gently move across rather than just tap, 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 tap all the way as you would on a digital joypad. I've got much more control. It's still not the last word in control. So I can get around this. I've not played this game for ages. But I've got a lot more control than I ever did with the digital pad. It's a lot more like playing the original arcade version. If I pause that, and I'll swap this over on the fly. I shouldn't really do this on the fly, but I'm going to do it anyway. Swap this to digital and go back to continue. Right then, you see what I'm talking about. I can't hold the lean on the bike. I've got to tap 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 to get it to go around corners. So you're never quite as competitive on this game on the Saturn as you could be on the arcade machine, where you're on a physical bike and you can lean it and position the bike however you wanted to. So I'm expecting this joypad, the new Wireless Pro joypad, to sit somewhere in between those two. So I can use digital pad if I want to, but we've got a 3D analog stick there. It's not a huge amount of travel, and it's about the smallest analog stick I've ever seen in my life. So I'm going to hook this up using this dongle and see how we get on. I did notice actually in the little instructions leaflet, it's quite a detailed instruction leaflet, all things good on here, but on the instructions it does say that to connect up to the Sega Saturn you use the V2 USB receiver, which is that doesn't fit in the Saturn. That fits into a USB port on a computer. All the other ones though, they say use the V2 Saturn receiver to go into Windows, into a Nintendo Switch, or even a PS3. Well, you can't do that. It doesn't have a Saturn. I think the instructions have got this the wrong way around. Anyway, let me hook this up and we'll see how we get on. Okay, well that was easier to pair up than I thought it was going to be. So that is the Sega Saturn receiver module, which goes into the standard Sega Saturn port number 1 over there. It's got a little button on there, raised button, that you press to put it into pairing mode, and there's a little flashing red light, a status light within the body of this receiver to tell you what the status of it is. When you first pair it up, you plug this into the Sega Saturn. and the little red light flashes. I've already paired it up, so I'm just going to tell you what I did. You then press the pink start button in the case of this joypad, and the little LED on the left-hand side there starts to flash green. That puts it into the controller into pairing mode, but you also need to press and hold the little raised button to put the receiver into pairing mode as well, and after a few seconds it's all connected. So when I turn this on for the first time, because I've already paired it, it's a solid green light, so it suggests it's already paired. So there we go, we've got control. I've got it into digital mode at the moment, so let's just have a quick blast at this. So it's full digital mode, so it's B to accelerate on this, A to slow down. I can hunt through the gears with the controllers, with the triggers on the side there, and it's just like the standard digital Model 2 joypad. It's you've got a tappy to get it to turn. Yeah, excuse my driving while I'm talking to you, but it works almost exactly as the digital pad does over here. It's feeling a little bit more comfortable. It's just a little bit of a bigger device. As you can see, it's just fractionally bigger to hold, and it's just a little bit more comfortable. I'll keep playing with it to see how it feels over a long gaming session, but it feels pretty solid at the moment. Now I need to try it in analog mode, and just like the original 3D one, it's not in analog mode all the time because the games weren't compatible with it in analog mode all the time. You had to make a physical switch as you do on that one. On this one, you have to press and hold start and B to get it to work. I've just had a very quick go at it, and while I can get it to go into 3D mode like this, if I go back to it, I've now got control. The digital pad does no longer work, so I've got lean control, but I haven't been able to figure out how to get it to accelerate. That's going through the gears. It's a different button which is changing through the gears, but that's going through the gears, but I'm not getting any acceleration, so I'm wondering if I have to reset the Saturn to get it to work. So bear with me a second. Okay, I've just reset the Saturn. We'll see if this works. So if I go to controller configuration, we can see we've got it's detecting it as a 3D controller. That's good. Now I'm just reading here in the instruction leaflet here. It says, if the LED on the controller is red, it is in standard mode. To enable 3D controls used by certain titles, press and hold start and B, which is what I've done, until it changes to blue. Now I can't see a red or blue LED on there anywhere. The only LEDs I can see is the 4 LEDs there, which is currently showing the second one as green at the moment. Earlier it was showing it as the first one as green. I don't know why it's gone to the second one there, but I don't know where a LED is. I can't see it on the instruction manual anywhere, so I don't know where that is. But looking at that, we are in 3D mode, so I'm going to crack up a game. Oh, well, that's disappointing. I've got lean. I can lean, but I've got no means of accelerating. I can't seem to find an option where I can use the triggers as an accelerator. And this brings me on to a bit of a point, actually, because these are, from what I can tell, just standard digital shoulder buttons. That's on or off. There's no analog progression like there is on these. That has got genuine progression on it, that has. So it really is a bit of a halfway house I'm finding so far. It's the same shape as the digital pad, yes. It's a little bit more comfortable than the digital pad and operates exactly like the digital pad does when it's in digital mode. But when it goes into 3D mode, certainly on this game so far, it doesn't go the whole hog. It doesn't fully replicate what that does. I'm missing the shoulder buttons. I mean, certainly if you use the modern controllers like the DualSense, DualShock, the latest Xbox joypads, where you've got a progression of the shoulder buttons, which is great on driving games and bike games like this one. This doesn't have that option. It's the shoulder buttons are either on or off, which is a bit of a disappointment. I was hoping that would be a progressive shoulder controller. It isn't. I'll keep playing. Okay, I've just booted up Daytona Championship Circuit Edition, and it's detected it as a 3D controller. We've got accelerate and brake showing as the trigger buttons up there. So let's hope that this works better than it did on Manx TT Superbike over there. That's not working either. So yeah, I'm in 3D mode, but that's just not happening. Now, I've been looking at what it said earlier on about the LED on the controller turning red if it's in standard mode, so digital mode, and turning blue if it's in analog mode, 3D mode. Well, it only changes. Those are the only LEDs that are on this thing, and they're all green. when I change it, if I press and hold start and B, it goes back to the first button. So green first button. If I press, oh, so it's in digital mode and not working at the moment because the Saturn still thinks it's in digital mode. Press start and B again, and the green LED on the first button turns to the second one. So I'm in 3D mode. So this instruction book has got a few issues with it. For example, thinking that should be in the Sega Saturn and the one that's in the Sega Saturn should be in a USB port over there. Clearly that's incorrect. But also the thing about the LED being blue and red when it's clearly green. There's a few little issues here, I think. Okay, I may have found a solution as to why the trigger buttons aren't working as I expect them to do on my Sega Saturn. I've just got to install this onto my PC to try it out on RetroArch. And while I was on there, I just thought I'd just pop onto Retrobit's website. And on their website, they already have the Sega Saturn Pro firmware available for this device. There are two different versions of it. There's one for the Sega Saturn receiver, which is where we've got the problem at the moment, and there's also one pending for the USB receiver for your PC and Switch. But since I've got the issue with the Sega Saturn, it is available to download, so I've gone ahead and downloaded it. And in the release notes for it, it says what it's going to update, and specifically there, the ZL and ZR shoulder buttons will now correctly mirror left and right when in 3D control mode. That is what we need. So I've downloaded it, and I'm going about the instructions as we scroll through all of this lot as to what we need to do. So we need to unzip things and find the location of the file that we've just unzipped, and then this bit here. Now this is where there's an additional confusion with, like I said earlier on about the instruction leaflet. It doesn't really coincide with what my controller is doing, but also there, point 4, using a USB to USB-C data cable. Well, this is the receiver it's talking about, and that is not a USB-C port. Now, it comes with a USB-C to USB-A cable. Brilliant, but that does not fit in that. That is a micro USB port, that is. Unfortunately, I've got a load of micro USB cables knocking about over the years. So that is very old hat, the old micro USB, but I'm going to plug this in and see if we can get this updated and get the Sega Saturn and the Sega Saturn Pro controller to work as I hope they would do. Hey, oi, hey, it works, it works. That's better. Brakes and accelerate. Excellent, great success. The firmware update on Retrobit's website does work. The trigger buttons now do control accelerate, brake as they should do. Fantastic. Right, test it on the PC now. Okay, so I've plugged in the USB receiver into a spare USB port on my Windows laptop, and as you can see, everything seems to work as it should do. And this is RetroArch, and it automatically detected it as a Retrobit Tribute 64 pad, which isn't this pad, that is the Nintendo 64 pad. So it automatically defaulted some controllers, but I've reformatted the controls to match what I think they should be, which is always a bit of a trial and error on RetroArch. Okay, I've had this now for a couple of days. I've been able to put it through its paces on both the Sega Saturn and on my Windows PC. It is now lunchtime on Friday the 2nd of February, and I wanted to share my opinions on this one because I feel it's a bit of a niche product, and I'm trying to find out who this is ideally aimed at because, yes, it now works on the Sega Saturn console, which I put back down there. Now that we've updated through the Retrobit website the firmware on the controller's receiver, it does now work as it should do. So I've been able to play all my Sega Saturn games, be they driving games or platform games, whatever, using the 3D controller method, provided that that Sega Saturn game is compatible. Search on the internet, there's only a handful of games which are compatible, but it does work. I'm going to caveat that with a few pointers. The analog triggers on the original 3D controller are progressive, as I've mentioned. On that, it is a simple digital on or off process. So it doesn't replicate that fully. And also, that's got a nice big thumb 3D controller, as they call it, whereas this is quite small. It takes a little bit of getting used to because you only need to put in very delicate inputs. That said, once you have got used to that, that works really, really well. It's quite nice to use. Compared to the original Sega Saturn Model 2 joypad, I find it more comfortable. I've been able to go for longer gaming sessions without getting any fatigue in my hands Now, I know a lot of people prefer that joypad compared to the Model 1 joypad. I would have dearly loved to have seen that based on the Model 1 joypad because I much prefer it. But I understand why they've done it on the Model 2 because more people prefer that. I'm not that person. But if you are used to that controller and you want a 3D pad wireless on your Sega Saturn and you haven't got access to one of those, which obviously wasn't wireless anyway, this works well for you. It just doesn't have quite the features that that one does, in my opinion. That was always a brick of a controller, and it was always difficult to use anyway. But I do miss the analog shoulder buttons on it. So, if you actually have a Sega Saturn console and you want a 3D wireless pad, that is a recommended purchase, provided you don't mind it not having the analog shoulder buttons like was on the original Sega pad. Then I think that is a pretty solid purchase. But what happens if you're a PC gamer or a Switch or PS3 gamer? I'm going to focus on PC gaming because the vast majority of PC games are based around the 4-button layout for your right thumb, as per Microsoft and Sony's layouts here. So I use a DualShock 4 controller for the vast majority of my Windows gaming, and that's personal preference. The Xbox controller over there is just as good. It's better in some ways, not as good in other ways, but it's down to personal preference. I prefer the Sony layout. So if I'm playing on the PC, I tend to use one of my DualShocks. I've got a couple up there. But if you're wanting to use, say, a Nintendo type game, for example, Nintendo have always been absolutely crazy when it comes to their controllers, which is why I've got an original N64 controller with a 8-bit DO adapter, so I can connect it to my Windows computer there. So if I want to play, say, GoldenEye on my Switch downstairs, you try play GoldenEye on anything but that controller there. It's just not going to happen. And it's the same for Sega. You've got a lot of Sega games which use the 3-button layout, these 3 buttons here, as it does on the old Mega Drives and the Saturns. And without a 3-button layout like that, it just doesn't work properly. It's just frustrating trying to get it to work. So you need a controller like that. And there are other options. There's the 8-bit DO M30 controller, which I've used for several months now. Although I didn't really ever get on with that. That was based on a Mega Drive controller up there, and it's just too small, and I get muscle fatigue on, I wouldn't even say long gaming session. After only a few minutes, I'm starting to feel a bit of pain in my hands, so I've never really got on with that. This is much better, and if you do specifically want a Sega controller, then yes, that will work quite nicely, but there's a big caveat. If you're playing a Sega game through RetroArch, for example, an emulator game. Now, I will stress at this point, you need to have the game for it to be legal to do that. I've got all my games, well, I've got a handful of my games. I've got nearly 100 Sega Saturn games, well over 100 Mega Drive games. But sometimes I like to play them on RetroArch, because if I'm streaming and recording games for YouTube, instead of going through all these adapters to get a HDMI cable to connect to my computer, it's just easier to boot it up on RetroArch, provided you've got the game. But also, for 5 or 6 years, my Sega Saturn wasn't working. The laser had died on it. I'd turn it on and it would just go to the boot up screen and say that can't read disc. That's because the laser had died. And I discovered that you could put the original Sega game that you own into a CD drive, and RetroArch would run it as a Sega game, as if it was a actual Sega Saturn game. And I would play my Sega Saturn games on my PC. There's a fatal flaw with this if you want to do that, because while that has a physical switch to be able to switch between analog and digital games, because, like I say, not all Sega games were compatible with an analog stick, so you need to activate it, which is great. You can do that on the Saturn, as I've demonstrated. You can't do that on the PC. That action of pressing the start button and the B button, it's not available on PC according to the instructions, and it puts it into some other weird pairing mode. You can't switch between analog and digital. You just can't. So if you go into any game, so Isle of Man, Max TT, or whatever the game you want to play, it will only do digital. There is no possible way of switching it from digital to analog. You just can't do it. At least I've not found a way of doing it. So if that is what you want to do, what you're buying this for, to play emulated Sega games, emulated Sega Saturn games on a PC, it won't work in 3D mode. It will only work in digital mode. So do be aware of that if that is what you're doing. There may be a workaround that. I've not found one yet. But if I wanted to play a actual genuine game on RetroArch using that controller, I can only play it in digital format. So that's a flaw for me. That is a big flaw for me. And I would struggle to think of many other reasons why you'd want a Sega layout joypad for your Windows PC. So like I say, if you're buying it for an actual Sega Saturn, yes, it works a treat. If you're buying it for your PC, be aware of the drawbacks. So in summary, first of all, when you get it out of the box, make sure you get the firmware update for the Saturn receiver. That's the first thing you need to do. You will also need to find a micro USB cable because you do not get a micro USB cable in that box. You get a USB-A to USB-C cable, but that will not connect to this V2 receiver, they call it. So you need to have your own micro USB cable available for you to do that. The instructions, as I've mentioned, they do kind of contradict itself in a few places. The red and the blue LED, for example, well, there's only green LEDs on there. The fact that it's telling you to plug the Saturn controller into the USB port and the USB port into the Saturn controller, it's just, there's some confusing things in there. I don't know, there's a bit of a disconnect between the controller and the instructions and the firmware and things like that. There are two versions of this available, a black version and the white version. As I mentioned, I went with the white version because it was basically to replicate that. So it's a Japanese version, and it's only that version that at the moment is available on Amazon if you choose to buy it through Amazon. But other than that, it's very, very good, but there are alternatives. The only reason I would get that for PC is if I had the desire for a wireless gaming option, because if I wanted to do what I'd said back in the day, I used to use this, which was an adapter. It's a Windows USB adapter, which I got from Amazon in 2016. I got it, so it's a long time ago. It's still on Amazon, but it's not currently available. But into that, you could plug in a PS2 controller, a N64 controller, and the original Saturn controller, and that's how I used to control things, and it worked really, really well. And I could also plug in my analog 3D controller, so if I want to use an analog controller on an emulator game, that's the way I do it. I can't do it on that. So it does lead me back to the question of, it's a bit of a niche product, so who is this for? If you're buying it for Windows, I would consider what other options are available to you. It's a very niche product for Windows. If you're buying it for an actual Sega Saturn console, yeah, I think it's just about worth the price of entry. It's better and more comfortable than the Model 2 pad. It's better and more comfortable than that. It's just lacking the shoulder analog buttons. But other than that, as a Sega Saturn console owner, I would recommend it. As a PC emulator user, not so sure. Anyway, I hope this video has been useful to you, and I shall catch you on the next one. I'm going to get me lunch now. Take it easy.